Hey guys, this is Science Day 3. Today's Day 3 is going to be pretty short. We're going to look at our source here, answer question 14. Then we have another source, and we're going to answer 2 questions using that source. So today's lesson's pretty short, and it shouldn't be too difficult. So, question 14. I want you to think back to the erosion video that we watched where the guy set up an experiment with the bottle that just had soil, the bottle that had soil and leaves, and then the bottle that had soil and grass. And we were able to figure out which one prevented the most erosion, okay? So it says, use the information and your knowledge of science to answer the question. In the early 1900s, farmers plowed large areas of land to plant crops. This removed the natural grasses and trees. These plants had deep roots that kept the soil in place. In the 1930s, there was a long drought, so crops would not grow. This exposed large areas of bare soil. The wind picked up a large amount of soil and blew it away, as shown in the picture. So here you can see that all of this that looks like smoke, those are actually clouds of dust or the clouds of soil that was being blown away by wind. So we have erosion happening here. We have wind erosion. So it says, after the drought ended, the U.S. government encouraged farmers to change their farming practices to prevent this from happening again. Which practice would best help the soil stay in place? So we're looking for the best answer. And guys, for this one, there are a few good answers, but we want the best one. A, planting only natural grasses and corn in the fields. So we know that planting natural grasses would be good, but think about what is specific about planting just corn. It is a crop, but is it going to help with erosion? B, planting soybeans and corn in fields next to fields with cattle. Well, we can plant more crops, but remember, they had crops there and they dried out from the drought, and that still caused erosion. So think about if that's going to be the best solution. C, planting trees and grasses in areas between fields with crops. So we know that grasses, again, can help with erosion, but let's talk about trees. If we have a bunch of trees in the area and the wind's coming through it, do you think the wind is going to do you think the trees are going to block some of that wind, or the trees are just going to let all the wind through? Think about what those leaves and those limbs would do. And then lastly, building pipelines to carry large amounts of water to use in sprinklers in the fields. So building pipelines is pretty smart so that it can carry the water during the drought. However, think about how expensive that would be comparing to planting one of these, either A, B, or C, so either planting crops, grasses, or trees. So option D would actually get pretty expensive, and when there is a drought, we don't have access to any water. So that's something else to pay attention to as well. All right, let's look at our next source. It says, use the information and your knowledge of science to answer the questions. The map shows places on Earth where volcanoes are found and earthquakes occur. So this map should look very familiar because we did an activity in class, and this is what our map looked like. And what did we call it? We called it the Ring of Fire. So here our volcanoes are represented by the little triangles, and then our earthquakes are represented by the circles. So we're going to use this source to answer questions 15 part A and 15 part B. So part A says, which statement best describes the pattern of where volcanoes are found and earthquakes occur? So A says most volcanoes are found on land. So when we look here, we can see that most of the volcanoes are not found on land. We can see that they're found on the edge here of continents. So that means A would automatically be wrong. And it says that most earthquakes occur in the ocean. Well, we do have earthquakes that are occurring in the ocean, but is it most of them or just some of them? It's just some, okay? So now let's look at B. Most volcanoes are found and most earthquakes occur on the edges of continents. So if we look, we can see that there are a ton of volcanoes and a ton of earthquakes that are forming along the edges of these continents. So B could possibly be the correct answer. C, most volcanoes are found and most earthquakes occur on islands near continents. Well, if we look, there's not too many islands in the middle here that are near the edges of continents. And then D, most volcanoes are found far from the edges of continents. Well, if this is the edge of the continent, that means they would be far from it. So somewhere in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of the continents, and I don't see any volcanoes there. And most earthquakes occur at the edges of continents. Yes, most earthquakes are occurring at the edges of continents, but that first part of D was not correct. So make sure that when you go through these answers, you're really reading through them and looking at every bit of information and looking at each source that will help you answer that. And then part B, how can scientists best use the pattern identified in part A? A, to prevent future earthquakes. Well, an earthquake is a natural hazard, and we talked about how humans cannot prevent natural hazards from happening. B, to predict where volcanoes will erupt. Well, if we have a pattern of where volcanoes are, would we be able to predict where they could erupt? C, to stop damage from volcanic eruptions. So it doesn't matter where a volcano is at, once it erupts, it's going to damage something, whether it's land, buildings, roads, or other areas, it's going to damage something. And D, to design homes that will survive earthquakes. Sure, they do have homes now or ways in which that we could design homes to help withstand earthquakes, but what about volcanoes? So again, make sure that you're paying attention to each answer choice and what it's saying and using your source to help you answer the questions.